got Jesse Torres. Great to have you here. How are you today?
I'm great, Tim. Great to be on. Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, Jesse has a interesting podcast on in the actual podcast. I call this a podcast, but it's really, I guess, a vlog or something like that. Who knows his terminology? But where can they find your name? Of yours is Hack My Business, right?
That's right.
Where
Yeah.
all can they get access to that?
Apple Podcast, Spotify. If you do just a quick Google search for Hack My Business, you'll find me there.
Okay, cool. Well, Jesse, where are you originally from?
Yeah, I'm born and raised in LA. I'm one of the few people that was actually born here and stayed here. I live in South Pasadena, which is just in the outskirts of kind of the downtown area here. But I grew up in the Valley. So those of you who are watching Cobra Kai or are familiar with the Karate Kid, that
Mhm.
is my old neighborhood. That's my old stomping grounds in Reseda,
Okay.
California.
Cool. So did you go to high school there? Is that
I did, yeah. Born and raised. I went to a private school for high school, a Catholic school in Mission Hills, which is in the San Fernando Valley. And then I went to UCLA for my undergrad and Pepperdine for my business school.
okay? Cool. So now it's my understanding that you worked for the Small Business Development Center there in LA. And
That's
so
right.
what was your position? What did you do there and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I was the regional director for the Los Angeles Small Business Development Center network, which covers LA County, Ventura County, and Santa Barbara counties. So it's essentially the equivalent of a state director, given the size. California, Tim, as you know, is always weird, man. We're always doing things a little bit differently. So we don't have one state director; we have five. It's
Right.
carved out into five regions, and every region is considered like a little state. But I was overseeing the LA network.
Yeah, I think Texas, we are carved up into four. So
That's right.
we're
That's
one,
right.
California, Texas, the only ones that are carved up like that. Everybody else is. So how long were you with the SBDC?
I was there, originally I actually joined my first run with SBDC. It was actually in 2009. I was part of the Orange County Inland Empire SBDC network. And then I was asked to come back to the university. I worked at Pepperdine just before. And then
Mhm.
I actually went back for about a year. And then I went back to the SBDC program as the LA director back in, what was that, 2011. And I stayed until 2015 when I was then and then invited to become the small business advocate for the state of California, which I had worked with that team, the governor's team, as part of my duties for SBDC. So yeah, man. I would say my career has been a lot of focus around small business work since 2009.
Okay. So what made you decide to start the podcast?
It's interesting. So I was there working in the governor's office until the governor at that point, Governor Brown, his term ended, and at that point, I wanted to start my own business, man. I had been in a role servicing small businesses, standing up programs for small businesses, but I always had that entrepreneurship bug. My dad was a small business owner. He had a barber shop for many years, and then later started a roofing company. And so I always had that bug. And so of course, timing is always everything. First I was part of a partnership as soon as I left, and then I left the partnership, and then I started my own company, Arroyo West, in October 2019. So right before the pandemic.
Just in time for everything to be shut down. So now every place was a little different, but like and you're in LA still, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So how long were you guys shut down, and when did you open up? How'd that all kind of work out?
Yeah, so it was such an interesting experience. And it all ties into the podcast, so I started my company at the end of 2019, and at the same time, I, wanted to start a podcast called Hack My Business. And the original concept around the podcast was that it would be a tool to help elevate my company, Arroyo West, which we do management consulting, focusing on economic and workforce development. So originally, Tim, it was a very selfish idea. It was like, okay, I'm going to create this thing to talk about how awesome I am at my work, or, things I
Right.
do. And then, lo and behold, pandemic comes. So my saving grace during pandemic was when I was there working in the governor's office just before launching my company. My last 2 or 3 years there was spent around disaster. We in California, we were experiencing and still do really major fires, big regional, half the state in fire.
Right.
And I was the guy that was playing the point for small business support. That was part of my duties. And so I became, involuntarily an expert around disaster as it relates to small business. So when the pandemic came, my initial contracts, like with the county and with the chamber, LA chamber, they transitioned all of that to disaster preparedness and resiliency. And so I was helping to stand up programs around COVID-19 pandemic relative to small businesses. And at the same time, as I was thinking about the programming for my podcast, I remember having a conversation with my producer, Christina Barcy, and I said, you know what? This original idea I had around my podcast, like I don't want to do that anymore. Like I want to focus in on the stories of the small business owners that are going through this experience, which is a once in a lifetime experience. I want to talk to people who are like me, uncertain, afraid, trying to figure it out, trying to pivot, trying to get my handle, my arms around like whatever is happening right now. And so, I decided my first season was going to be about that. So I would bring in restaurant owners, people who are having to radically change their business model overnight, beauty salon owners, that kind of thing. And I would even bring in like the SBDC or SBA to talk about, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program or Paycheck Protection Program. Like, what the heck is that? How do you use it? So I used that platform to focus in on people's stories and try to get them more information about how they can, help themselves. So yeah, it was a really interesting journey. What I like to say is that I think I did a good job of capturing those stories, but also selfishly for me, it was a creative release. You remember that first year, which was just like you guys, we were shut down. The governor's order came in March. We were shut down effectively. Everybody thought it was going to be 6 weeks, turned into 3 months, turned into a year. And, even just now, things are still kind of dicey. I mean, we, you're always anticipating the next shoe to drop, whatever is going to be monkeypox, whatever else is going to come in next.
Right.
But yeah, it's quite the journey. We all went through something very unusual, right?
Yeah.
Very extraordinary.
Well, so and you guys in California were shut down for a full year pretty much, and then
Pretty much.
yeah, okay. So I think we were probably ahead of you as far as opening up, and then things go back. I mean, we're basically there's nothing going on at this point here anyway, and hadn't been for probably a year or so, I guess, as far as related to the measures that need to be that were put in
Right.
place. Well, we're still everything's still in turmoil, right? I mean,
Right.
some guys are still struggling, some folks that were doing well are coming back now. So are you seeing something similar to that, or what are you seeing in your area?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much the same thing. So it's this weird normal, it is definitely, yeah, like the restrictions aren't there as much right now. So it's essentially on you as the business owner to decide like what level you want to maintain. But yeah, I mean, I'm here in Pasadena, right? I have an office here in a co-working space. I go outside. I don't see many masks anymore. I don't see, not the same kind of, I don't know, the same anxiety. It's not quite as prevalent. What's interesting is I just took a quick walk around and I'm seeing them pulling up I'm guessing you guys went through the same thing, like all the restaurants kind of moved into the street, right? Created kind of like outdoor spaces. And I'm actually seeing them. Oh, no, you
Yeah,
guys didn't have
we
that?
didn't have any of that. Of course, our weather's different, right? So in
Oh,
summers, we're over 100 degrees. I mean,
yeah.
I mentioned a few weeks ago in San Diego, right? And the guy
Mhm.
was the mayor of San Diego came to the deal and he was apologizing for 90 degrees, and it was like
Yeah.
it's 90 degrees at sunrise, here, a little bit before that. I mean, it's broke now, but, we had, I don't know how many for 100. And then, then of course, in the middle of a pandemic, we had what we call snowmageddon, that basically shut us down for about a week. A lot of people were without electricity. It was just, kind of the worst snowstorm that Texas had had in years. And, we just, nobody was really prepared for it,
Yeah.
And so we were kind of, which, if we get, well, probably the same thing if it were to ever happen in LA. If we get, half an inch of snow, man, we shut down, right?
Yeah.
Just because we don't have the equipment. All these people that come from up north and move down here, they're like, what? An inch of snow? It's not, well, yeah, okay, get out there with no ice, no infrastructure for taking care of it. And yeah, I'm sure you're a wonderful driver, but still, you got to have all that. Which up there they have it every season. We go a decade without something like that happening, and then we've had probably once in a lifetime storm right in the middle of everything.
That's crazy, man. Yeah, we don't get, we're yeah, it's all that stuff just exacerbates the issue. Yeah, we also are experiencing kind of strange weather. Like I said, I've lived in LA all my life, and new things that have emerged is definitely like the seasons have kind of accelerated. And then also we have now humidity. So my mom lives in Houston. My aunt and uncle are out there, and our family in El Paso. We never used to get humidity. Now we get that. We got mosquitoes now, which is weird. We didn't really have that. And they're just kind of screwy weather, man, like really random kind of rainstorms. So yeah, but yeah, so here in our neck of the woods, during the pandemic, the city's allowed the restaurants to move into the street, to do outdoor dining. And so what's something interesting, I just saw it today, is they are removing some of that. And so I took it as a sign of, okay, and I don't know this for sure, but I'm wondering if the city here is now repealing that ability. So on one level, it's a sign of kind of going back to normal, but also kind of a shame, because there was a kind of like a cool vibe, to walk down the street and see people in outdoor cafes, essentially, just like in Europe, or, I was in New York and they had that quite a bit there. So yeah, it's strange. It's this kind of, so I guess it's great to see people in the restaurants again. Things that haven't really been impacted here is office space. If you go downtown, you're just not seeing as much traffic. People have really gotten used to the virtual working environment, right? When I talk to small business owners, so down the street from my house, there's a small restaurant that opened up back in 2018, and my family we were the first customers there. And so we know the family really well that owns it. And during the pandemic, they were my touch point. Like I would track them. Like, what are you going through right now? It's like, okay, we're having to radically redo my business model. I had to now start using DoorDash and Uber Eats to sell my stuff. I gotta create an outdoor patio now. I got to apply for PPP. So every few months I would check in, and when I last checked in with them, they were kind of back to normal, but their biggest issue was labor. They could not find anybody that want to work in the kitchen. They had to stop serving cappuccino drinks, espresso, because they couldn't find a barista. Finding somebody to come in at 3 a.m. to do the bread was very difficult, right? People would show up or, apply for kitchen jobs, but not show up for the interviews. So I'm seeing that. I'm curious if you guys are seeing the same thing, like that labor kind of radical change, right?
The labor market has tightened. And of course, I'm in a microcosm. Pretty much Waco's where I focus. We have like a 7-county area that we service that's basically south of Fort Worth, north of Boston, and Waco kind of sits in the middle, 90 miles from each, right? But Waco's my main focus. We're a town of about 100 and probably 130, give or take, and then a county around 200 or so. So pretty small. But yeah, we're the labor pool it seems to be a little better, but it's not. It's still extremely difficult. Particularly, a great example is we had a very large Amazon. I don't know what you call it, distribution center, I guess. And they have not been able to fully open up because they haven't been able to hire enough people. Now, of course, they need quite a few people to staff it. So that could be part of it. And then also I got the impression they like to shift people from other places, and then they were having a little trouble getting, people to, to move around to some degree. So, that we I will say one bright spot is we had we have a kind of a fledgling tourist industry here.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know if you know, but Discovery Network had well, it was HGTV, I think, originally had a television show called Fixer Upper, and
Okay. Yeah.
based here in Waco, and the couple are, from here basically, and so then they ended up parlaying that over a number of years into they've got a little center down there, and they redid a restaurant, and they've got some stuff, but then they've also parlayed it into an actual network. And so what
Oh, that's cool.
DIY network is now Magnolia Network. And so that's helped us, whereas we used to have maybe 600,000 people a year for the tourist industry.
Mhm.
Now we're up, we were over probably about 2.4 million prior to the pandemic. And then the year just after, of course, that was kind of the height, of
Yeah.
just open their thing and all of that. And so then it kind of edged down to about 2.2. And but even in the middle of the pandemic, we were like at, probably 1.6 or better, I believe, million. So
Wow.
it was still, it still did pretty good during that. I mean,
That's great.
one period of time when they were closed, but then people kind of made up for it, after that happened. And from what I'm under, it's looking like 2022 is going to be up a little closer to that 2 million, but maybe not quite as much.
Are you seeing now kind of a new business ecosystem being developed there now in your neck of the woods? Like, is that leading to kind of permanent change to the business community?
It's certainly the downtown community for sure.
Interesting.
Where their business is located, which is the focal point of this, right? So it shifted the gravity of downtown basically to them from what was a corridor that was being worked on and developed and what have you. And of course, it's right adjacent to our university, which is Baylor. And and they had a good football team. We got a new stadium down on the river there beside it and everything. So that had a lot of hoopla that kind of helped it get things rolling and that sort of thing. And but now when you're talking, to some to various small businesses, what kind of advice do you give them about how to handle what's going on?
Yeah, I mean,
so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I was fortunate that one of the projects I was running and still do help out quite a bit is called the Outsmart Disaster Program, and it's a program that was developed here by the state. Outsmartdisaster.com if you wanted, anybody wants to check it out. But in there we actually talk about the principles around preparedness. This all kind of built off of the national disaster framework, but what I tell people is really important to focus in on is scenario analysis, right? And I know this world really well, but it's the idea of taking stock of yourself at certain moments in time, and you got to decide what makes most sense for you, like what kind of cadence or frequency you want to do this. But the idea of stopping, analyzing yourself, usually you can do it through like a SWOT analysis, like a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. But really what you're doing is saying like, where am I at? What, looking ahead, what are potential risks or opportunities, right? And then making a simple grid to say, okay, if scenario 1 happens, how will I respond, whether negative or positive? So what does scenario 2 look like? What if things change radically? What would I do in that scenario? And so what I really advocate to people that the best thing they can do is really take the time to think about what is likely to happen to you, whether positive or bad. And most importantly, do think about the bad thing. Think about, like, I'm a worst case scenario guy. I know this about me. I'm just like, I tend to lean towards that. I'm always like, what is the worst thing that could happen to me? And I do this to my kids too. I'm like, I'll tell them, and my kids are now 13 and 11, but when they were 6 and 7, I say like, what would you do if you got stuck in a car, right? Nobody around. What are you going to do? What's your options? How will you try to get out? And I do the same thing with my business, not to be so dramatic, Tim, but I do the same thing. Like, what is the worst thing that could happen? I did this during the pandemic, in March. I just started my company I had a few contracts in place, and I remember sitting down late at night when I knew things were going really crazy, and I literally sat there and I said, I need to think about what would happen if tomorrow all my clients removed all their contracts. If they said, you know what, based on what's happening, we can't do it. What would I do? How would I survive? How would I pay the mortgage? All that kind of thing. Do I have enough in my savings and my business savings to move forward? And so I just encourage people to do that. It's hard, it's painful, and often you're doing it after a long day at work. But the more you can sit down and think about what is your biggest risk, what is your biggest opportunity, what will you do in that event, what is most essential to your business, and how will you protect it? Like, that is the most important thing to do. And most importantly, don't do it alone. There's programs like the Small Business Development Center or Women's Business Center where you can get free support and you can have somebody help walk you through it all and think about your business. So that's what I do, man. I always, I'm a big advocate and a believer that what we call technical assistance, that one-on-one coaching, is the most important thing you can get for your business, even beyond capital. Like, literally, it's the mentorship, the guidance, the one-on-one support. Even if it's not with an advisor, but if it's just a fellow entrepreneur, but just the ability to talk things through and help make good decisions is like the most important thing that you can do. So yeah.
Well, now I noticed that that the ports in LA and Long Beach were kind of backed up there for a while. We were really fortunate. For whatever reason, Houston seemed to function, which is our main port in this part of the country, and maybe the only one that was functioning pretty much where it's supposed to be. So what kind of supply chain issues have you guys been wading through, and are those, I understand the port's back pretty good, so have those been taken care of, or are we sitting with a bunch of inventory? Because that's what sometimes that's what I've heard in other parts of the country anyway. It's like, we got too much now.
Yeah, I mean, kind of from what I understood, it was like this perfect storm of things. One, you just had this backup there. You have a truck driver kind of issue, right? Just a lot of things kind of came together. I think at this point, the backlog has kind of relaxed a bit. I would say we're probably also benefiting from the fact that, people are no longer stuck at home with nothing else to do except buy stuff online,
Yeah.
So they're actually shopping at stores now. So you're not seeing the tremendous demand. Anecdotally, I can tell you that I was in a car accident in February of this past year, and it took a long time for my car to get out of the shop because the parts were not available, and it took a long time, or even things like computer equipment, right? So I think at this point it's pretty much relaxed. But yeah, isn't it amazing, like, the impact that has? Because the LA port system, we have two major ports here, LA and Port of Long Beach, and that pretty much feeds or provides supplies to the entire big swath of the country, at least definitely on the West Coast. So if you have one spigot turned off, I mean, that's livelihoods at stake as business owners that are really impacted. And the world, people think they're not connected to the world at large, but they really are. The parts that you have in your equipment come from other places, and it's all reliant on the efficiency of movement of goods. And when that doesn't happen, you're in a world of pain. Yeah.
I don't know how old you are, but I'm in my 50s, early 50s. And of course, I remember a time when you would go to the store, and if there was something you wanted, it wouldn't necessarily be in stock. And you'd find the guy and you go, hey, when's the truck come in? And the truck came in once a week. But nobody knew for sure if your thing was going to be on there, but they were going to order it for you or something, and then you would run back down on Thursday because that's when the truck came in to get the thing you need, right? I mean, that's a world that, the last 30 years, nobody even understands. And in fact, I remember going to college, and they were talking about this brand new just-in-time inventory system, and it's so phenomenal and it's great. And then, we were just reveling in how marvelous it was, but never thought what would happen if just one little piece stubbed its toe and the whole thing kind of unravel. And, basically that's kind of what we've experienced.
Yeah, isn't it crazy how the world changed? Yeah, so I'm in my mid 40s. When I went to college, my first year as a freshman at UCLA was when email was introduced.
Yeah.
But the idea of instant gratification, to have Amazon deliver something to me the same day, like, how crazy. Like, I remember Sears catalogs, and if you wanted something for Christmas, like, you would kind of beg your parents, and that Santa would somehow magically have it delivered to you. You
Yeah.
know. But this idea, and just how kind of a dangerous that is, like especially if you're building like your business model around that, like for example, my wife is an event production person. She does stuff for like the movie studios out here, and her world is essentially dependent on the arrival of certain goods. Like if she wants to do a party or an event for like Fox that requires a certain type of linen or some type of whatever it could be, UPS or FedEx better deliver it at the time that she needs it for the event. And if it doesn't happen, it impacts the world. But just how dependent we are now on this accelerated shipping schedule, right? Which is still crazy. I mean, that's a recent thing. That is a last 5 years thing,
Yeah, certainly the urgency, but just the speed. I mean, those things were taking place in manufacturing probably 20, 30 years ago, right? Because I remember we had
Right.
a Levi's plant here, and somebody, I mean, it was within a couple of hours because denim comes in these huge, like semi-truck size rolls, right? And
Yeah.
bring them in, and it's like as the last little piece was running out of the machine or into the machine of that, another one would show up, and then they would run it in there, right? And it would be just so they were doing that a number of years ago, and then they just took that same technology and applied it to to our everyday consumer goods and things, right? And then we got used to it, so we know it. But some of those things are still taking place on the manufacturing side. You're not, if you're not getting that, and you were used to running that tight for that many years, how does that go? How's that work out? And a lot of our smaller businesses aren't obviously at that scale, but they're either suppliers for some of those guys, or depending on the goods that those kind of manufacturing people produce on a regular basis, to take that piece and do what they do to it, and then sell it to their next piece or whatever. And what kind of advice would you give somebody in that one that's how to offset that, or do or deal with it? Or
what I often tell people is that they need to study that to understand their supply chain, because I think a lot of folks don't really grasp that, and the dependence that they have on certain factors that may be not obvious, right? Like I would use the example in some of my presentation around like a baker. Take a baker in San Francisco, right? Well, her ingredients could be coming from all different parts of the state if she's trying to do fancy stuff. Or even like the supply, the parts for her stove, her oven, and something goes wrong. And so what I always advocate people is one to study, first understand what is essential, right? Secondarily, study then what is the supply chain that ties into your work, and to do redundancy, like I said, it's like, think about if things go wrong. Think about if you didn't get that particular ingredient or that supply or that part, what is your backup plan? What is your other option? Where would you go? What would you do? How would you survive? So a lot of it's just like that studying, but I think people just don't even know like that you have a certain business process, and that process is connected to many different things. And you might not think you're relying on somebody else, but you probably are. You just haven't had the chance to really sit down and look at it in that kind of way before. So yeah, I mean, studying, analyzing, is really important.
Well, yeah, and I tell people to just wait, and just to make sure that that they have an idea of what they're going to do if it doesn't come in. It being one of anything from an employee to into a raw ingredient, right? So like my restaurant clients have been struggling with inconsistency, because I mean, the product in a restaurant is, consistency is the key, right? I mean, and so if you're serving a type of French fry all the time, and then something happens to change that, and all you can get were the other ones, that's going to affect your market. Now, I will say, at least in Waco, the customers have been very tolerant of these changes and these understandings, where far more tolerant than they would have been, say, in 2018. I mean, somebody was used to getting a waffle fry, or used to getting a regular fry and got a waffle fry. I mean, I might have been a little upset about it back then too,
Yeah. Yeah.
Now it's like, well, at least we got potatoes, right? I mean,
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I called it there is a little bit of a pandemic kind of buffer, right?
Yeah.
Like especially like when we first started opening back up. I don't know, the 30, 40 minutes of wait time because they're short staff,
Yeah.
It'll be curious to see, yeah, how much that is tolerated as we now move into kind of returning back to normal, right? Like,
Yeah.
will you be as allowing, it's just that funny that sense of kind of entitlement, right? Like, I want to have the consistent experience. I always think about, you remember the uproar when McDonald's changed its going from tallow to right. I mean, when it comes, especially about food, people. That's why I never worked. I've worked retail in my life. I've never worked food because people in food, they just get crazy. Like their demands are too intense around that.
Well, and I think it's like anything else, right? It's like, what are your options?
Right.
So it's one thing if it's happening universally. So if if you're having
Yeah.
if you have the same wait time at the Mexican restaurant that you have to the Italian place that you have at the burger joint, right? I mean,
Right.
then that makes a dent. Now, it's odd this subject came up, but do you guys have Chick-fil-A out in?
We do.
Do
Yeah.
you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, these guys, at least around here, are like state of the art getting you through this drive-through. I mean, the drive-throughs here are 3 lanes wide, and they get you in and out. It's like the turn lane, the turn lane in the highway is where that's where the line begins, right? So,
Yeah.
so these guys are just like streamlined. So, and they're notoriously good places to work for employees as far as pay and benefits and all that kind of stuff. So I noticed the other day I went through there. My grandson loves Chick-fil-A sandwich. And so it took us a much longer time than usual. And looking around, I think it was labor issues on that
Oh,
particular
really?
day. Now, we've been back there before, and so I think it was unique to that moment. But still, when it's affecting somebody as well organized and as well oiled as them,
Yep.
it's happening everywhere.
Yeah. I just always recommend, for those business owners that are listening, is like the best thing to do is just be really transparent about it. I think where people go crazy is when you're trying to hide for it and they can see you getting really flustered and it gets weird. I always appreciate during the pandemic when the business would be really upfront. They'd be like, hey, we just want to let you know ahead of time that you're going to be sitting for 30 minutes. Here's why.
Mm-hmm.
They don't need to get a whole lot of detail. I think it's even when you get too much detail, it can be even worse. But just to let people know, like, hey, just be patient. We're trying to make it all happen, but we're a little bit short staffed. So people will understand. Like we've all gone through a global pandemic. It's like you got to give yourself a break. Like you've got to go global pandemic. Everybody understands. You just need to talk about it and be upfront about it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And let them know before it would change when the customer had an opportunity to go to some sort of other option, right?
Exactly.
If that was possible, whatever.
Right.
Yeah, and I think in long you may lose that one sale, but I think in the long run you're going to be better than sticking a guy in a closed drive-through that's got to be back to work in 15 minutes and taking that long to get through the line.
Especially if their waffle fry isn't available, like if you go through that long time, the waffle fry isn't there, I'm going crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. That's it. Hey, this is an odd question, but it's interesting. But if you could repeal a law or add a law that would help business, what would it be? How do you think they could either get a help from legislation or repeal some legislation that would help them?
Oh yeah, I mean, I can tell you, like I sit on the Small Business Commission for the City of LA, and I remember getting into not an argument, but hear this idea that the small business owners in the City of LA would be responsible for the behavior of the customer when it came to like masking and everything else. Like it was the duty of the small business owner to make sure that the person walking in was vaccinated. And I remember having this conversation, like, how are you to verify that? Hey, like, I'm not a health expert. And what if the customer chooses to lie, and says like, oh yeah, I'm vaccinated, or whatever else, and they weren't, and then somebody got sick at my operation, like how would I be liable for that? So I would remove that, and or this, or I don't know if it's necessarily even a law, but it's this idea that the small business owner needs to become the police officer, that they have a scientific or health understanding that goes beyond the pale, such that they can make a determination around certain things. Like I always think, it's interesting because like I said, I do disaster work, and I was recently able to kind of participate in the writing of a section of a new economic recovery kind of playbook, right?
Mhm.
And one interesting thing I found in looking over like kind of older documents relative to disasters and small businesses and the role of small businesses. And one thing that became really apparent to me is that the traditional thinking around a disaster was that it is the responsibility of the small business community to return the normal. Like that is our job. We're supposed to like get people feeling good about themselves again and like create things. And instead of thinking like small business owners will be just as impacted as everybody else in the community, and they themselves need resources and attention and dealing with trauma, and that it is not up to us to solely lift the community back, right? And you kind of saw that as like this weird kind of feeling, like we sure saw during the pandemic of like how normal, what we think of normal is the ability to go to your local restaurant and have a sandwich, to get a cup of coffee from a local coffee shop. Like that is the feeling of normal, to go to a store, right? And that small business owners need just as much support and love and attention and help as anybody else going through a situation, right? So yeah, a long-winded answer to saying I would remove a lot of laws that put the onus on the small business owner to somehow control the behavior of their clients, right? This doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah. So now, what are some top books that you recommend to small
Books.
business owners?
Oh man, you're coming with all the great ones. Okay, top books. So yeah, I mean, I like a lot of things around marketing. I'll pretty much read anything from Seth Godin, who talks a lot about innovative marketing. I'm also really interested, he's kind of like a more highly visible kind of author like Malcolm Gladwell, but I like the idea of like looking at trends, and understanding that, and what drives people to make decisions, or even like like he wrote a book called Tipping Point, like when do certain things create the circumstance in which we are in, right? And so for me, like things that help me understand root causes, like what is really driving stuff, like what do we need to know about the world right now that is shaping things. I tend to lean more towards marketing because for me that's really kind of interesting. Drucker, I'm a Peter Drucker guy. I like his approach around management. So I would also recommend, I think a mistake as a business owner is that you only read business books. I think you can actually get some of your best ideas and innovation reading fiction or biographies, right? And so I would just encourage people who are thinking about their own reading list, like venture outside of that, because you would be surprised, if you're picking up like the really great science fiction book, that actually might help you think differently about a scenario, right? If you read a biography of somebody that you just find amazing, even if they're not a business owner, but were like a leader in something, them actually help spur ideas, So, the more you read, the more you know. I'll say that much.
Exactly. So now, what's one of the most interesting business concepts you've ever run across? I've been around long enough to catch some pretty good ones, I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, the whole idea, okay, it's not really mind blowing, and there's a lot of different kind of descriptors around it. People call it lean, right? Or, like the Startup Nation kind of world kind of really embraced it. But for me, what's always really resonated is this idea of you have an idea, you do it, you examine it, and then you do it again. You reiterate. So you're always like, you're always improving. Like, I think a mistake is in like rolling something out and then not stopping to analyze, like, how are things going? What is the progress there? And being bold enough to admit when things aren't going quite right and course correcting, so that's kind of like the main idea around lean. I always remember being part of a session put on by Intuit where they encouraged us, like they put us in a room and they said, come up with a hypothesis around like a business model or a product design. And then they actually had us go out into the street and talk to people about whether they would buy it,
Mhm.
and then we had to come back and make changes and then try again. Right. I was like, oh, okay. Like that's how it all should really work. Like you should have an idea, try it out, and then learn, adjust, and then do it again over and over and over until you kind of get it right.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So now, how long or how many podcasts have you done, roughly? Do you even know? I bet,
Oh,
man.
I'm up on 100. I'm in season 8 right now. I mean, the best part about having like a small business focus is, is that you can go to all kinds of different directions.
Mhm.
You can, there's so many things that attach to the world of small business
Mhm.
that I can go into mental wellness. I can talk about nutrition. I can talk about,
Mhm.
managing a family at the same time trying to run a business. Like you can go into all different areas, or you can even like not have it focus around a certain topic, but on a person, like I
Mhm.
like inviting CEOs or, people who are going through it, even those who aren't maybe are at the very beginning, to hear their perspective of what that's like, because I'm trying to help share information to people who are also on the path to something who maybe haven't have it all figured out, so they can
Mhm.
hear like right away. But yeah, it's been fun, man. I gotta say it's a great creative outlet. Have you found it enjoyable? Do you enjoy doing the
Yeah, I do. I
blogs?
mean, yeah, I really do. Yeah, I sure do. It's great to talk to interesting people such as yourself, and kind of pick their brains and see what's going on and that sort of thing. Which, what's been the most challenging podcast that you've ever had to do?
Yeah, the most challenging podcast. For me, it's kind of interesting. I would say like sometimes the higher the level of the person, like the more successful the person is,
Mhm.
the harder it is sometimes to have a really effective conversation with them, because sometimes they're operating on such a different level that they kind of forget how to translate it back down. So that's been
Mhm.
interesting. Like, kind of piercing through, like to move away from like the PR points or the talking points and into more nitty gritty of like, yeah, but what was it really like for you? Like, what's it
Mhm.
really like for you when you're just starting out, and to be vulnerable, because as they become more prolific, it is harder for them to be honest about the current struggles. They don't want to reveal a whole lot. So getting folks to be really open about their fears and their concerns in a way that would be relevant to other entrepreneurs can be sometimes be challenging. So I always like people who are kind of
Yeah.
on the rise, who are still there in a place where they can talk openly and freely about what's it really like to be a small business owner.
Right. So, what podcasts are you the most proud of?
Oh, the most proud of. Oh man, I'm really proud of my first season, because I was new to it. I was starting out, and I really made it a point to focus in on entrepreneurs that were struggling in the moment, So it was, like Kinky's Hot Box, which does hot chicken out of South Bay, and
Okay.
what it was like for her to have to go remote, right?
Mhm.
To do virtual. A friend that had a beauty salon in Highland Park here in LA, and having to deal with health ordinances that are changing every month, right? In addition to
Mhm.
having to deal with being viewed as adding gentrification to her neighborhood, right?
Mhm.
So for me, like that was really, or even a company, it was actually kind of a larger company, but had to move their business model to creating PPE, you know,
Mhm.
um, and what that was like. So yeah, I was really proud of that. I really felt like I gave a voice to people that were having a moment and really just want to kind of share, let people know that they weren't alone. So
Right.
for me, I'm most proud of that.
So, what was your most controversial podcast, or when you got the most, either
Oh
interaction
yeah.
or negative interaction, rather?
Negative. I did have one controversial one at Four Seasons Total Landscaping. They were in the news for a hot minute because they were inadvertently the host of a press conference by Rudy Giuliani, who got the name of the place wrong and thought he was at the Four Seasons Hotel, ended up at Four Seasons Total Landscaping. And so I didn't get any real negative feedback, but it's really interesting to have the event had just happened and we were able to get leadership from Four Seasons Total Landscaping on the podcast. But I think we did something cool. We actually focused the episode on how do you capitalize on controversy? Because I've actually heard that from a few different friends who kind of found themselves in the spotlight, like, sometimes good, sometimes bad, like, and this happens now in this day and age a little bit more often where, say an influencer on social media talks about your company and suddenly the next day you have 1,000 sales when you're not ready for it. Right.
Right.
And so it's really good to have them on there to talk about how are you taking an advantage of this really strange moment in time for your business. You guys sell landscape equipment, right? How are you doing that? And to have the guy say, we're going to take full advantage. We're going to do t-shirts. We're going to do a documentary. We're going to sell as much paraphernalia and products as we can, right? Knowing that in 3 weeks it's going to be over.
Right.
And so, so
now
it's
what
just kind of
exactly,
cool.
I mean, he confused the Four Seasons Landscaping with the deal, but did he end up showing up on site to do a conference? Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It was right around the kind of election cycle, right? So things are really crazy.
Was it post-election or pre-election?
It was when was that? That was like January.
Okay,
like,
so it was,
or maybe it's around December. I can't remember now, but it's like, when things were going down, there's a lot of issues.
Yeah.
And so the idea was that they were going to have a press conference at Four Seasons in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't know who got it wrong, but they showed up at Four Seasons Total Landscaping.
Yeah.
And so they had to do the impromptu. So and the guy even said we weren't sure why they were even calling us or why they wanted to do a press conference in front of our parking lot. But sure, man, if you want to come and do a press conference,
man. Come on,
take full advantage. Yeah, so they totally took advantage. They were gracious hosts.
Yeah. So now, in the last year, what is it that you regret not getting done?
Oh man, Tim, you got these questions, man. These are great.
Oh, you're doing fine, man. You're knocking them out.
Yeah. What do I regret? With entrepreneurs, as you know, and I'm a small shop. I have with my company, it's me, I have an analyst, and there's always this, kind of this regret of, oh, am I maximizing my work effort? Am I truly being strategic enough? Am I making the right decisions, on everything? And so could I have squeezed out another extra hour? Could I have done that project a little bit differently to get me a better result? Right. Mm-hmm. So I think there's always going to be this lingering thing like, oh, am I fully maximizing the opportunity I have? Some people call it kind of like the imposter syndrome, right? You're always like self-doubting. Mm-hmm. So that's why it's always good. Like, I have here a few other friends who started companies at the same time. And so we will often text or call each other and say, I feel like an idiot because I made this decision. Would you have made the same decision? And then to hear them say like, yeah, man, yeah, I would have done the same thing and done it even worse. I mean, all of that just really kind of helps, nobody understands like other founders and other entrepreneurs. But yeah, I have many regrets, Tim. Many things I could have done better.
Well, there you go. So now what of your personality traits you think's been the most useful for you in business?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I have a unique ability to think big picture, to see connections where other people might have a harder time. That's just always been something that's worked well for me. I also really don't get really emotional. And it's funny because I used to work, I think part of it is that I used to work at at a theater, or other places where I was always surrounded by very kind of creative and emotional. I mean, it was great. They were high energy, very emotional. And what I learned to do is to kind of like not be that because it was so overwhelming, and so that's a strength where I can remove myself. Also, I'm a big time, I love playing poker. Mm-hmm. And one thing I'm really good at is getting over bad beats. Something bad happens, I'm already on to the next thing. I'm not going to let whatever just happened hold me down, or I'm not going to worry about it. I might think worst case scenario, but I'm not holding on to that, at least in the business life. My personal life, very different, but I'm always like, okay, I didn't win this thing. There's always something around the corner. This didn't quite work out. What next? Even with something good, it's like, okay, we did great on that. Yeah, but what comes next? Like what else are we going to be doing? So I think that's been a really kind of core strength. I would also just encourage people who, one thing that's been really helpful to me is I had to learn how to become a public speaker, and that has really helped. So being able to kind of communicate and share information is just really important to, I think, you're leading a business. So I just encourage people to really think about communication skills. Like that is one really important thing to work on in general. So yeah.
Yeah, do you guys have a pretty active Toastmasters?
We do. I never went through that kind of formal training, although I definitely recommend it. I was just fortunate enough to have bosses that were mean to me and would say things like, before a 500-person event, they'd be like, Torres, go up and say something to the crowd, talk about this initiative. And then as a 20-year-old thinking, what am I going to say and how would I do it? And I would go up there and learn. In fact, the president of Baylor, Lynn Livingstone. Yeah, she's my former boss, at Pepperdine. And I would, and people at Pepperdine were very good at public speaking. And I would watch them, how did Linda speak to an audience? How did what can I learn from that? But I had to learn kind of the hard way, but the best way, like trial by fire, and how to make a point, and learning that for the most part, people aren't really listening to anything you're saying, but they'll remember that you spoke. And that's the most important thing to realize, that you can just really be comfortable and getting up there and saying a few words and maybe getting in a good line that people will remember, like that. That's a big part of it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, your former boss, she came in, she's doing a pretty good job here, it seems, but she came in at not under the best of circumstances, and of course her predecessor just passed away last week, Ken Starr.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Oh wow. And yeah, that's right. Ken Starr used to be the dean over at the School of Law for Pepperdine. Yeah, absolutely.
And so Baylor's done pretty good by swiping Pepperdine employees. So
yeah, I always get excited when we play them. I'm a big UCLA guy. Whenever we play you guys in basketball, so we'll see how things go.
Yeah, well, we've been pretty good there
Pretty
recently.
good.
He's working on it. They're working on it now. Girls basketball, we've been phenomenal. So.
Oh really? I haven't been tracking. Okay.
Yeah, we had a.
Oh, that's true. Yes.
Yeah, we had I don't know, several championships. I don't even know how many now. And now, of course, we.
I think it's like back to back.
Yeah. I think they were going, either they did 3 or they were about to do 3 or something back to back. But we lost our coach who'd been here forever. Though she went to LSU, and we got a new one though. She seems to be pretty good last year. I think they were respectable, and we'll see what happens.
That's because Linda Dean Livingstone, Dr. Livingstone, she's a basketball player.
Oh yeah, she's huge. I mean,
and her husband too, Brad.
Yeah, physically, yeah. So what's the most interesting thing you've either watched or read or listened to or podcast or whatever recently?
Oh, most interesting thing that I listened to recently or even watched.
Or saw or read, whatever.
Yeah. What has been interesting? Oh gosh. I'm trying to think right now. These are all great questions, Tim. I'm I'm trying to read I'm reading this one book right now that's all about the how things work on a kind of subatomic level, and I'm reading it because the concepts for me, I love science stuff, but it's hard for me to kind of grasp it. And I'm trying to really get it. But this idea of that multiverse stuff, that other scenarios exist, right? And how do we get our arms around that? How do we understand that? For me, that's just really fascinating. I think about alternative reality and how things could be in other worlds or different dimensions. I love thinking about that and trying to figure out how the heck do people even think about this, or even arrive at understanding, you know. So for me, that's been most interesting. I think partly because my kids are all into it because of Spider-Man, you know.
Yeah.
So
Oh yeah. Spider-Man in the multiverse or whatever.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't. Yeah, that whole thing just kind of blows me away. I mean, and then how they? It makes no sense to me that they can prove some of these things with math.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. How's that work? No, of course I'm a financials math kind of guy. So yeah, I'm like, yeah, I don't understand how that works, but I'll take your word for it. Hey,
Yeah,
what's the most
exactly.
ridiculous thing on your bucket list?
Most ridiculous thing on my bucket list.
Yeah.
Oh man. Okay, well, I'll tell you one thing I'm truly trying to do right now, and it's probably ridiculous at this point, but you know, I like to run. I've
Mhm.
done the LA Marathon a few different times. I'm gonna do it again next year. I really I want to qualify for Boston, man. I want to run the Boston Marathon. Yeah, to do it, you need to be under 3 hours and 30 minutes in my age bracket, which is now 45 to like 54, I think. And I'm just old and broken, man. I'm old and broken. I don't think I'll ever get there. I'm gonna try. I'm doing this stupid keto diet because it's the only thing that helps me keep my weight off.
Yeah.
But to get to that kind of like pace, like a 7 minute kind of pace,
Wow. Yeah.
I don't know if I could do it. So I think at this point it's pure ridiculous. I'm gonna try,
Yeah.
man. I'm gonna see where it gets me.
You'd be the second marathoner I interviewed this week.
Oh, really?
Yeah. A guy by the name of Eric Huntley, he had gotten into that a number of years ago. He hasn't in a while. And he's got a YouTube channel, and I interviewed him earlier in the week. So,
Oh, I gotta check him out.
yeah. It's America's Untold Stories is the name of one of his channels. He's got several of them, but that's kind of an interesting one. It's, different history things, but that aren't quite as prevalent. So, yeah.
Got it. Cool.
Well, Jesse, man, I certainly appreciate it, and I really enjoyed the time here. And if anybody's listening, if they can subscribe and hit the like button, that'd be great. And and also if there's any type of guest or type of question, or anybody has anything, just be sure and leave it in the comments. And I'm sure if they have a question for you, I can relay it to you if they do. So, man, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me on, Tim. Great to chat with you. And yeah, definitely if anybody needs any support, feel free to send my way. But encourage people to check out Hack My Business. Always looking for great show topics and ideas. So always welcome the feedback. But thanks, man. You're doing a great show. It's been great talking with you.
All right. Thanks. Bye.